in introduction to this, I just want to share some words of background for Rabbi Steinsaltz, zt'l, and Chaim. Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, was born in 1937 in Jerusalem under the British Mandate. At a young age, he was attracted to religion after his father sent him to learn Talmud, and at a young age developed a passion for education. He was the youngest principal in Israel at the age of 32. He developed different schools within Israel, educational institutions that were both unique in their educational philosophy and their style. Perhaps most prominently was Yeshivat Makor Chaim in 1984, which is not just a flagship high school for boys in Israel, but also a model that has been replicated and emulated across the world. Yeshivat Tekoa in 1999, as well as a higher level yeshiva for those post-high school. And he was a prolific author. Perhaps one of his most famous non-Talmud works is the 13 Petaled Rose, which I personally found is such an insightful window into Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. Of course, perhaps he's most famous for his work in translating the Talmud, which was a 45-year project, culminating in a global day of learning that continues annually, connecting 48 different countries of Jews together in a day of learning, all subsumed under an ideal and a motto, which I'm told was a favorite of his: let my people know the education and the need to bring that wisdom to bear. But I think what's so special about our opportunity tonight is Chaim has had the privilege of having a unique and special relationship with Rabbi Steinsaltz for many, many years. And we have the opportunity to hear a little bit behind the curtain of this towering luminary and figure in our Jewish community beyond his works and his writings. I can tell you personally, Rabbi Steinsaltz provided a tremendous amount of comfort and stability to my family in perhaps one of the darkest chapters for my family. And I know that he's done that for so many others across the world. And so it is such an honor and a privilege to ask Chaim to share some reflections and to acknowledge Chaim's parents who are here, who I know had such a close and deep relationship with Rabbi Steinsaltz for so many years. And we thank them for joining as well. Chaim.
Okay. So that was my speech, and I hope everyone enjoyed it and learned something about Rabbi Steinsaltz. No, I'm just joking, but that was a good introduction, and I'll go through a little bit that as well. I want to also acknowledge Arthur Kurzweil, who's on the phone. I wouldn't necessarily do that, but part of this actually a small section comes actually from a book that he wrote called Pebbles of Wisdom, and some of the quotes here come from the introduction there as well. I've tried to keep it short. I don't. Hopefully it'll be 10 to 15 minutes. Okay. I'll start. Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz was born on July 11th, 1937, in Jerusalem to Abraham and Leah Steinsaltz, both fervently socialist, more likely communist in ideology. His father was so devout a communist and to the cause that he went to Spain in 1936 to help defend the leftist government in a civil war against General Franco's nationalist forces. That came out of the obituary of the New York Times. Rabbi Steinsaltz grew up in an entirely secular household. He says that he read Marx and Lenin before he read the Bible. He said, quote, "I grew up in a family where neither my mother nor my father went to synagogue, not even on Yom Kippur. My father said that he did not go because he had too much respect for the place. He said, and I completely agree with him, that the synagogue is not a theater. Either you are a participant or you don't go there. Because he could not be a participant, he couldn't go to watch. Nonetheless, when he turned 10, his father hired a Chabad tutor to teach him Talmud. His father said to Rabbi Steinsaltz, I don't mind if you're an atheist, but I don't want any member of my family to be an ignoramus. I don't know when, but Rabbi Steinsaltz decided to become a religious Jew early in his life, studying with this Chabad tutor and later on in a Chabad school. He would later become a chassid of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, for which he became very, very close with, and for which he wrote a book called My Rebbe. Rabbi Steinsaltz said his decision to become religious at an early age was actually in line with his parents' belief, saying, "I'm such a skeptic that I became skeptical of skepticism." He was clearly an Eloi, and a discovered Eloi, a prodigy early on in his life. He wrote articles as a teenager. He was on talk radio in Israel early on in his life. And the age that I had for him becoming a principal of a school was 23, not 32, but who will split hairs? He started his monumental translation of the Talmud at age 27 in 1965, and indeed did finish it in 2010, 45 years later. He opened a K-12 school called Makor Chaim and a Hesder Yeshiva. In 1989, right after the Iron Curtain fell, he and my mother, among others, traveled throughout Russia and the former Soviet Union. We lectured at packed halls to the Jews who hadn't engaged with rabbis or their Judaism in an open forum in over 70 years. He started networking channels and classes for them to embrace their Judaism. He felt and wrote that the time to reach the Jews of the former Soviet Union was very short, at most a few years before they completely assimilated into Russian culture, or unless they decided to re-engage Judaism. He opened a yeshiva in Moscow, and his motto during this time, as Rabbi Brander said, was "Let my people know," which was a riff on the Soviet Jewry movement in America's chant of "Let my people go." He was awarded the Israel Prize, authored more than 60 books, and in many circles is most famous for his magnum opus, The 13-Petaled Rose, which was his way of introducing Kabbalah back into Jewish life. I heard him once say that before Shabbat zt'l, every child in every cheder studied Kabbalah, that it was, quote, the theology of the Jewish people. But the rabbis of the time were so upset by the messianism of Shabbat zt'l that they closed off this part of the Jewish corpus. He thought this was a gross overreaction, and his books, especially The 13-Petaled Rose, but also his books on Hasidic thought, are meant to try to reintroduce this Jewish theology back into the Jewish people. When asked about who he intended to help with his work, he gave the analogy of a spinning frisbee. He said, the various Haredi and ultra-Orthodox communities are at the center of the frisbee, elbows locked together and seeing only themselves as they spin around. They are more or less safe. The Jews at the edge of the frisbee are flying off every second of every day, and there's nothing I can do about it. But in the middle, there are Jews holding on for dear life. These are the Jews that I want to reach. When I was 10 or 11 years old, my mother started fundraising for Rabbi Steinsaltz. I grew up in a traditional modern Orthodox household. We were, if anything, Riskanites, my parents having davened at Lincoln Square since before they were married. But we did not have a Rebbe or the terminology of what a Rebbe was. And then my mother came home with stories about Rabbi Steinsaltz, about conversations she heard with donors or journalists, and the projects that he wanted to pursue and that she felt committed to as well. He would stay over at our house over Shabbos when he couldn't make it back to Israel. I, as a child, was very uneasy about this turn in my mother and in my family. And I wrote him a letter asking what he had done to my mother and asking whether or not we could trust him. I know he read the letter, but he never directly responded. But from that point onwards, I feel that he had an affinity towards me, and I certainly had one towards him. From then, which was late in the 1980s, until his stroke in December of 2016, I saw him fairly regularly. He would come to New York once every 3 or 4 months, and I would see him in a personal setting or in group classes, usually more than once a visit. At one point, he even spent a semester at Columbia overlapping with my, I think I was at Columbia at the time, I might have been working, and I was able to chauffeur him around the city, and I spent a lot of time that semester with him, although chauffeuring in the city meant taking taxis with him. He left an indelible imprint on almost every aspect of my life, my belief, my self-worth, which college I should go to. He announced I should go to Columbia when I was in like 7th or 8th or 9th grade. And I was at that time really a failing, absolutely failing student. I thought he was crazy, and my parents thought he was crazy, but eventually he was proven right. My occupation is directly due to him. My marriage is forever bettered by his advice. He named my children. Even my having a beard, much to the upsetness of Dina, is due to him. My mother says that Rabbi Steinsaltz did not like to be called Rebbe or a Rebbe. She tells the story of someone coming to the rabbi to discuss politics and voting, and he refused to engage, saying that that was the realm for politicians, and he was devoted to the spiritual realm. He also vehemently refuted people who said that he was a tzaddik. He was adamant that he was not a tzaddik. I'm not sure how he would take to me calling him my Rebbe. I didn't address him really that way during his life, not to his face at least. But to me, he was my Rebbe, and I was to him his chassid. And hundreds, if not thousands of other people feel the same way. Tonight I wanted to discuss one characteristic of the rabbi that I think brought people into his orbit, and where he was really unique. And that was really around his emphasis on education, and more importantly, what education meant to him. First, he was fiercely protective of the Talmud, believing it, not the Bible, to be the cornerstone of our Jewish corpus. In 2012, he lamented to a Times of Israel reporter that the early state of Israel made a great mistake by placing the Bible into their public school curriculum instead of the Talmud, saying, quote, "The Bible was written by prophets. If you read the Bible, you somehow become in your mind a little prophet. That's the way Israelis speak to each other. They don't have conversations. They all have complete and unlimited knowledge. Learning Talmud would bring a big change to the Israeli mind because it deals with and is connected to dialectic. The Talmud is a book of sanity, and when you study it, it confers a certain amount of sanity." His approach to education was to put things in ways that people could resonate with culturally and emotionally, as well as intellectually. His discourses on Hasidic thought, for instance, are sprinkled with analogies of math and science and the natural world in an attempt to make these ideas clear to the modern reader. I once was in a class with him when he was discussing faith, or emunah. I suggested that faith might be promoted by an appreciation of science. For instance, could a deep appreciation of the contradiction between Newtonian and quantum physics promote the need for a God? When you get to some sort of contradiction, other examples that I gave him were what came before the Big Bang, that somehow you get to sort of ends in science, and maybe the only way to solve those ends is by including some sort of a need for a God. He was adamant that he thought these realms were distinct, and that scientific inquiries led to scientific discoveries, not religious ones. But I pressed him, probably because I had read an article somewhere about it, and I got him very frustrated. So he thought for a second, and then he said, "Science and religion are like tools. Science is a hammer, and religion is a cup. You can't drink water from a hammer." And he smiled broadly, giddy with himself for coming up with such an analogy. That was his way to really promote ideas that might have been complicated in ways that everyone could really understand. His definition of education was also very unacademic. He had a special place in his heart for children who caused mischief in class. To the dismay of his own principal at Makor Chaim, he would tell the kids to misbehave in class. I think it was his way of encouraging skepticism, which he thought and wrote about was the essence of thinking and ultimately of believing. He was unconcerned about academic performance, perhaps both for the children as much as for the school, especially at an early age. He felt that a school should first and foremost be a place where children, quote, feel like they belong. After that, he thought everything else would fall into place. Instead, he was much more concerned about reinterpreting ideas and reshaping questions into essentially Jewish and existentially Jewish themes. He re-educated as much as he educated. In 1970, when the Who is a Jew debate was raging in Israel, as it pertained to the right of return, Rabbi Steinsaltz wrote an essay called "What is a Jew? Is there an essence of a Jew that binds each of us together, despite our many diaspora homelands, cultures, and languages, and various religious and secular beliefs? He felt that was a much more compelling question. In October 2001, in the face of 9/11, he wrote an essay on heroism, explaining that a Jewish hero is not one who is, quote, heroic as a lion, who, quote, summons enormous strength in seconds to do something spectacular, but rather is a person who rules his spirit, quote, the person who walks with his backpack and continues walking even when he gets hit, the person who, when his buildings are destroyed, rebuilds them, who, when his plants are uprooted, replants them, who, when his descendants are killed, gives birth to new ones. This is what he thought was a true hero. He also had much to say about Hollywood and would always talk about how the true heroic themes in life don't make good movies, which is, I think, part of the re-education that he'd like to talk about. His educational approach of redefining ideas while infusing them with meaning was not only aimed at Jews. Maybe his only book aimed to a broader audience, titled Simple Words, was a compilation of words like good and envy, death, God, and Hollywood that he thought should be understood from a different light. Finally, I want to talk about one specific idea that I have held on to since his death, and that gives me great solace, and which I hope can give you solace as well. The rabbi talked a lot about tshuva, repentance, and even named a book of his with this title. His idea was to focus on the process of change. He said that it is true that certain people can change in the blink of an eye and change permanently. But most people do not change quickly. Rather, positive change can be agonizingly slow. And if you look at it too closely, a person might be viewed as even going in the wrong direction. His first book of Hasidic discourses is titled The Long, Shorter Way. It can be that a person is directly in front of his home, but there's an obstacle in his way. He might try to climb the obstacle, but that might be too difficult. The shorter way might be to go around the obstacle. If that obstacle is a river, for instance, the way around it might take a long time and send you even in the opposite direction for a while. If we were to look at just a small portion of a person's journey, we might chastise that person or judge them for going in the wrong direction. However, if you zoom out and take a wider view, we might see that indeed it is the shorter way or even the only possible way to get home. He also said that sometimes the act of changing or of tshuva does not necessitate taking any steps at all. Rather, a person can spend their entire life turning around until they find the right direction to be looking. This reorientation, too, even without taking a step, is a great act of change, a great act of tshuva that should be celebrated. In conclusion, I miss the rabbi very much. I've not fully realized that I won't ever be able to speak with him again. But it is his messages like these that bring me solace and that will nurture me and my family for our lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chaim, so much for those moving words. We so appreciate them. Thank you, everyone. You can unmute. I want to also acknowledge the presence of President Joe Lohr, who's the president of the Harvard Seminary, who's joining us. It's good to see you virtually and see you eye to eye for the first time in my life. I just will close with this. Shane regrets that she couldn't make it, some technical difficulties. So I'm going to do my best Shane Kessler impersonation of the announcements with really just one announcement reminding everyone that on August 23rd, Sunday, August 23rd, we have the privilege of having our first in-person gathering again, obviously under certain guidelines. And we encourage everyone to join us. It's a welcome back bingo and bites, and it'll be a great opportunity to see people we haven't seen for many months, and welcome the many new families who have moved to the area over this summer and this odd period. Because of COVID reality, we need everyone to pre-register. So please, the information's on the website. It's in lots of the emails. And please sign up and join us. With that, I wish you an early good Shabbos and have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Chaim.